You're standing in the dim flicker of a single oil lamp, its flame dancing like a trapped soul against the rough-hewn walls of earth and stone. The air is thick cloying with the scent of damp soil and something sharper fear, perhaps, or the metallic tang of unspilled blood. Your fingers brush the cold iron bars that seal this chamber, buried deep beneath the Colline Gate, where the city's pulse fades to a muffled throb. Whispers echo from the shadows, soft Latin prayers mingling with the drip of water from unseen cracks, each drop a countdown. The women's white stoli cling to their skin soiled by the descent, their hair unbound for the first time in decades, falling in heavy waves that catch the light like fallen halos. One of them, her face pale as marble, meets your gaze. Her eyes hold not terror, but a quiet defiance, lips moving in silent invocation to Vesta's eternal fire. The guards shift their sandals, scraping against the packed dirt floor, breath hot and ragged in the confined space. You taste salt on your tongue, sweat tears the faint bitterness of myrtle leaves they chewed to steady their nerves. Above, Rome slumbers under a harvest moon, oblivious to the rites unfolding below. They don't know yet that this is no sacred expiation, but a perversion scripted by an emperor's whim, where accusations of hidden debauchery twist into chambers of final breath. Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves accusations of sexual misconduct, forced confessions under duress, and the systematic horror of live burial, a form of execution that blends psychological torment with the slow theft of air and light. These details are historically documented, drawn from primary sources like Suetonius's Life of the Caesars, Cassius Dio's Roman History, and Pliny the Younger's correspondence, as well as corroborated by archaeological remnants of the Vestals house in the Forum. But they are deeply disturbing, evoking the raw vulnerability of women targeted not for crimes, but for the threat their purity posed to a tyrant's insecurity. If these themes trigger you or feel too heavy, I completely understand. If you choose to step away, there's no judgment in prioritizing your well-being. History's shadows can overwhelm, and self-care is a modern rebellion against ancient cruelties. For those still here, I promise to handle this with the gravity it deserves, weaving in systemic analysis to illuminate the machinery of power rather than lingering on isolated suffering. These aren't just tales of tragedy. They're blueprints of how autocracy devours its guardians' warnings, etched in stone for any age where truth bends to the powerful. This wasn't a descent into divine wrath, some thunderous judgment from Vesta's hearth upon her own priestesses. This was a machine oiled by paranoia and forged in the imperial forge of the Flavian dynasty, designed to grind down symbols of Rome's untainted core until only the emperor's reflection remained in the ashes. Domitian, the last of his line, didn't stumble into these atrocities. He engineered them, reviving archaic rituals, not to purify the state, but to consolidate his grip on a Senate seething with resentment and a populace weary from civil strife. The Vestal Virgins, those 6 women sworn to 30 years of chastity tending the sacred flame that symbolized Rome's endurance, were no mere collateral in his moral crusade. They were the ideal targets, embodiments of a republic he despised their independence, a living rebuke to his absolutism. Accusations of incestum, unchastity that imperiled the city, flew like arrows from his court, striking down not just individuals, but the very idea of untouchable sanctity. And the underground orgies whispered in later folklore. Those are shadows cast by the true perversion, fabricated tales of bacchanalian excess beneath the city, unsubstantiated by Suetonius or Dio, likely born from the lurid satires of Juvenal, or the need to sensationalize what was already monstrous false trials leading to entombment in lightless vaults. Yet the horror stands verified. 4 women condemned their lovers, scourged all under a ruler who styled himself Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. This reframes the narrative from mythic debauchery to calculated erasure, where the emperor's reforms masked a purge of potential rivals. The question isn't whether you can stomach the details of damp earth closing over living flesh. It's whether you're willing to remember the system that made it possible to see in Domitian's Rome the faint outlines of modern inquisitions where accusations serve agendas and the innocent pay in silence. If you believe these women's voices silenced but not erased deserve amplification from the archives, consider subscribing. Every engagement unearths more from the dust of forgotten libraries, turning passive reading into active remembrance. In an era of digital echo chambers and politicized scandals, their story urges us to question who benefits when purity becomes a weapon. To understand what happened to those women entombed beneath the Colline Gate, you need to grasp the machine that built their graves, the sprawling apparatus of late 1st century Rome, a colossus teetering on the edge of its own grandeur. It was the year 81 CE, the air still thick with the smoke of Vesuvius's eruption from 8 years prior, when Pliny the Elder had perished documenting the apocalypse that swallowed Pompeii and Herculaneum. The empire stretched from the misty coasts of Britannia to the sun-baked sands of Judea, its legions enforcing a pax romana that masked the fractures beneath economic strain from endless wars. A debased currency that bit into the plebs' daily bread, and a senate reduced to rubber-stamping decrees from the Palatine Hill. Vespasian, Domitian's father, had clawed the throne from the chaos of 69 CE, the year of the 4 emperors, when Galba, Otho, and Vitellius bled out in rapid succession, leaving Nero's suicide as prologue. Vespasian's Flavian dynasty promised stability, funding the Colosseum's arches with spoils from Jerusalem's sack in 70 CE, but it was a veneer. By Domitian's accession, the treasury groaned under the weight of Titus's triumphs, and whispers of senatorial plots hummed like flies over a corpse. The Vestals, housed in their elegant atrium adjacent to the forum's temple of Vesta, stood as anchors in this storm. Selected at 6 or 7 from noble families, they served 30 years, 10 learning rites, 10 performing, 10 teaching before possible marriage, their chastity ensuring the gods' favor. No locks on their doors, yet violation meant incestum, a crime against the state punishable by live burial in a sealed underground cell stocked with meager provisions, a lamp-bread watermilk, a mockery of sustenance, ensuring death came not swiftly by blade, but slowly in isolation. This wasn't mere superstition. It was psychological warfare, a public spectacle reinforcing hierarchy. The Vestals wielded power, pardoning prisoners with a touch, owning property, riding in carriages, but their bodies were communal assets, vessels for Rome's spiritual health. Domitian, ascending after Titus's feverish death at 50, inherited this system primed for abuse. Recent scholarship like T.P. Wiseman's analysis in Domitian and the Vestals 2006 draws on epigraphic evidence from the fasty priestly calendars inscribed on marble, confirming the Virgin's role in imperial cult rituals. A letter from Pliny the Younger, unearthed in the 19th century from the Laurentian Library, laments the era's moral fervor as a theater of accusations, where informers thrived like rats in the sewers. Archaeological digs at the house of the Vestals, led by Italian teams in the 1980s, revealed frescoes of mythic chastity and underground conduits for offerings, reminders that this sacred enclave bordered the emperor's own paranoia. These events are attested in primary sources. Suetonius, writing circa 121 CE within living memory of survivors. Cassius Dio's 3rd century epitome cross-referenced with Xiphilinus's summaries, and Juvenal's 2nd satire skewering Domitian's hypocrisy. Corroborated by numismatic evidence, coins minted post-83 CE proclaiming Judex Aquis, just judge, they paint not random cruelty but a calculated protocol. The political climate was a tinderbox. Dacian wars drained coffers while senatorial families like the Cornelia nursed grudges from Vespasian's purges. Economically, grain shortages sparked riots in the Subura, and militarily, the Rhine legions chafed under absentee commanders. Socially, hierarchies ossified. Women of the elite navigated betrothals like chess pieces, while slaves whispered of Spartacus's ghost. Into this stepped Domitian, not as savior, but as architect of dread. He wasn't born a monster. He was manufactured layer by layer in the crucible of a family that devoured its own to feed ambition. Titus Flavius Domitianus entered the world on October 24, 51 CE in a modest insula on the Capitoline Hill, the youngest son of Vespasian, a tax collector's son turned general, and Domitilla the Elder, whose quiet piety masked the steel of survival. Vespasian, broad-shouldered with a horseman's squint and a laugh like grinding gravel, embodied the novus homo grit, new man risen from Sabine hills, his face pockmarked from camp fevers. He doted on his boys unevenly. Titus, the golden heir, trained in arms from boyhood, while Domitian Slighter, with his mother's dark curls and introspective gaze, lingered in the shadows of scrolls and games. Family portraits in the Lararium show them thus: Vespasian in toga, arm around Titus's shoulder, Domitilla, her veil framing eyes sharp as aquiline beaks, holding young Domitia, the daughter who would later haunt her brother's bed. Life was comfortable but precarious. Vespasian's postings to Africa and Thrace meant long absences, leaving Domitilla to instill discipline with tales of Lucretia's virtue and the Republic's lost freedoms. Domitian at 8 watched his sister Domitilla succumb to fever in 69 CE, her small form wrapped in white linen, the household wails echoing off atrium walls. "She was the light we didn't know we needed," Suetonius later quotes a tutor saying, but the loss hollowed them. By age 10, as Nero's madness peaked, the Flavians fled to the countryside, Vespasian plotting from afar. Domitian, left in Rome under a freedman's care, evaded Otho's purge by hiding in a temple altar's hollow heart, pounding to the rhythm of patrolling praetorians' boots. Emerging, he found his world upended. Uncle Sabinus, the city prefect, lynched by Vitellius's mobs, his head paraded on a pike past the forum. Domitian, now 18, stumbled upon the corpse in the temple of Jupiter, the metallic reek mingling with incense, his hands trembling as he closed the eyes, family reduced to spectacle. Vespasian's victory brought reunion, but scars lingered. Domitilla, the elder. His mother perished soon after, perhaps from grief or poison. Rumors swirled, but Suetonius notes only, untimely, her funeral pyre on the field of Mars, casting long shadows over the boys. Titus, ever the favorite, married thrice, siring a daughter who died young, leaving him childless and bitter. Domitian wed Domitia Longina in 71 CE, a match of passion and politics. She, fiery with auburn hair and a wit that cut like glass, bore a son who lived mere months, his tiny cries silenced by convulsions in 73 CE. "The gods mock us," Domitian confided to a scribe per a fragment in Dio. By 30, he was the last branch-standing, siblings gone, parents dust nursing a survivor's ledger of betrayals. Titus's death in 81 CE, whispered as fratricide by poison, elevated him, but the throne was a poisoned chalice. Suetonius writes something chilling: "There never was a better servant nor a worse master." As co-emperor under Vespasian, and Titus Domitian had managed the ab epistolis, his quill scripting edicts, with precision. Now, as sole ruler, that efficiency turned inward, paranoia blooming like nightshade. Psychological stages unfolded: initial reforms, draining marshes, rebuilding the capital gave way to surveillance networks, informers rewarded with estates seized from traitors. Modern analysts like Pat Southern in Domitian Tragic Tyrant, 1997, trace this to attachment fractures, abandonment in youth, fostering a god complex where control supplanted connection. He, renamed months after himself, demanded prostration. Yet in private, he penned poetry to sleep verses of unrequited loyalty. The transformation crested in 83 CE when a false oracle warned of senatorial daggers. The Vestals must be pure, he decreed, or Rome falls. It was no epiphany, it was ignition. And then everything changed. The Ides of June 83 CE dawned humid over the Palatine, the air heavy with jasmine from the imperial gardens and the distant clamor of forum vendors hawking garum and figs. Domitian, clad in a purple-trimmed toga, his bald pate gleaming under the sun, convened the pontifical college in the temple of Vesta, not the grand circular one with its eternal flame, but a side chamber scented with burning pine resin and myrrh. The high priest, a stooped patrician named Umbricius, fidgeted with his lituous staff while the 6 Vestals knelt in their suffused white veils, casting ethereal glows. Whispers had circulated for months, rumors of laxity in the order paramours, sneaking through moonlit porticos. But this was no routine inquiry. Domitian's eyes, small and unblinking, like a basilisk's, swept the room. "Rome's hearth flickers. he intoned, voice low as a augur's rumble. "Who dims it?" Informers stepped forward, freedmen with greased palms, senators currying favor, leveling charges against three, the sisters Oculata, both in their late 20s, daughters of a consular line in Varanilla 35, a veteran whose sharp tongue had once chided Titus for tardiness at rites. The accusations incestum with equities trysts in the house's shadowed wings. No evidence beyond hearsay, but Domitian overrode tradition. The pontifices, bound by oath, debated in murmurs, but the emperor's nod silenced them. "Justice demands swiftness," he said, and so it began the machine whirring to life. First came the summons that shattered the Vestals' dawn vigil. It was a crisp autumn morning in 83 CE, the leaves on the forum's plane trees turning amber under a reluctant sun, the air crisp with the bite of coming frost and the acrid smoke from sacrificial altars where priests slit the throats of white heifers, their blood pooling warm on marble. The house of the Vestals, that austere edifice of tufa and travertine, with its impluvium reflecting the sky like a mirror to the gods, buzzed with unaccustomed tension. The Oculata sisters, Junia 27 with her brother's aquiline nose and a laugh that once echoed through Subura festivals, and her sibling barely 25, whose gentle hands had embroidered the sacred palla for Vesta's processions, were roused before Lares stirred. They wore the traditional suffibulum white wool veils pinned with golden fibulae, shaped like flames, their feet bare against the cool mosaics depicting chaste nymphs fleeing satyrs. Political winds howled outside. Domitian's recent triumph over the Chatti had filled the campus marches with cheering mobs, but senatorial benches emptied as exiles multiplied. Guards in plumed helmets, their cuirasses etched with imperial eagles, escorted the women to the Palatine's audience hall, where tapestries of Alexander's conquests muffled the sisters' footsteps. Junia, eldest by 2 years, clutched a small lararium idol of Vesta, her knuckles whitening. She thought of her childhood in a Campanian villa racing barefoot through olive groves, dreaming of this service as honor not nous. Her sister trailed, whispering Ave Vesta, her breath shallow, tasting the faint honey of last night's ritual libation. The hall reeked of polished cedar and oiled leather senators in togas stiff as boards averting eyes. Domitian entered his progression, announced by clanging salpinx trumpets, his face a mask of pious severity, fingers drumming a rhythm only he heard. Informers testified vague shadows of knights unseen claiming couplings in the house's cellars where wine amphorae hid more than Falernian. No witnesses, no tokens, just words sharp as flints. The sisters protested in measured Latin Junia, invoking precedents from the 12 tables, but the emperor leaned forward, his breath sour with undiluted Pascha. "The flame wavers," he murmured, inspecting them not as priestesses, but assets to be appraised. Tension coiled like a serpent, hours of questioning throats parched from endless recitations of hymns, stomachs hollow from skipped prandium. Then the verdict, unspoken, but iron choice of death. Junia chose the hemlock draught, her sister the blade's mercy. Varanilla summoned next, a widow whose paramour was a harmless bibliophile, opted for the noose in her cell. Guards led them away, the doors thudding shut like tomb seals. When dawn broke, their absence rippled through Rome. No wail, only silence, the forum's chatter subdued, as if the gods themselves mourned. This wasn't about lapses in virtue, fleeting sins of flesh that the old republic might have hushed with exile or fines. This was about the system, a meticulously calibrated engine of control with 5 interlocking cogs, each grinding away a facet of resistance until only compliance gleamed. Domitian didn't target the Vestals for their alleged trysts, those underground orgies of tavern gossip, unsubstantiated phantoms from Juvenal's biting verses, but because their autonomy mocked his divinity. The first cog, fabricated intelligence, where informers like the eunuch Parthenius spun webs of rumor for gold, turning private whispers into public peril. Scholarly debate, as in the 2016 CAMWS paper, How to Get Away with Murder, Domitian's Executions of Vestal Virgins by Cynthia Damon, highlights how these charges aligned with purges of the Cornelian genes rivals from the civil wars. It revealed power's architecture, an emperor bypassing the pontifical college's autonomy, inserting imperial overseers to audit the flame's purity. Broader patterns emerged similar to Claudius's expulsion of immoral senators, but escalated fitting Domitian's blueprint for a theocratic autocracy. Long-term, it eroded trust in sacred institutions. Post-assassination, Nerva restored Vestal privileges, but the scar lingered, fueling Christian critiques of pagan hypocrisy. Modern parallels sting. Think of witch hunts in Salem or Stalin's show trials, where spectral evidence convicts the inconvenient. They didn't seek confessions for truth. They sought ghosts, women reduced to warnings, their erasure, a lesson in obedience. By condemning the oculati and varanila without trial's full rigor, Domitian didn't just destroy 4 lives, he unraveled the social fabric, threading fear through every noble house. Vestals, once partners of the condemned, now embodied the peril of prominence. He built no temples to vice, Dio notes wryly, but altars to suspicion. This cog turned and Rome's hearth dimmed, its light refracted through the emperor's unyielding lens. But he wasn't finished. The machine required calibration, and what happened next reveals the second cog's cruel precision, the spectacle of interrogation where dignity dissolved in the acid of coerced testimony. It was midsummer 84 CE. The Tiber swollen with July rains, its banks slick with mud that splashed the hems of togaed officials hurrying to the temple of Vesta. The season's heat pressed like a fever air shimmering over the forum's paving stones, carrying the stench of offal from the Cloaca Maxima and the sweeter notes of blooming oleander from the Vestals' gardens. Inside the house, corridors lined with busts of past virgins, Maximi's stern matrons in diadems, now seemed to watch with accusatory eyes. The remaining Vestals, including Cornelia, the chief priestess at 42, with her silver-streaked braids and voice steady as the Appian Way, gathered in the Sacellum, their white gowns damp with humidity, fingers tracing the grain of an oak table, scarred from decades of offerings. Cornelia, born to the ancient Licinian clan, had entered service at 7, her novitiate marked by a plague year's end prophecy they said of her stabilizing hand. She thought of her nieces in distant villas wed and bearing heirs, lives she might have claimed after 30 years, but chose to forgo for the order's sake. Praetorian guards, their faces shadowed under crested helmets, metal gorgets, chafing necks slick with sweat, hauled in witnesses, slaves with averted gazes, lovers, jilted kin. The political backdrop churned Domitian's agrarian laws, redistributed land to veterans, breeding resentment among the equites, whose estates shrank. In the chamber lit by hanging lamps casting jittery shadows, interrogators circled like wolves. Cornelia faced the brunt, accused of sheltering the Oculata sisters' indiscretions, her own virtue questioned via association, tension built in layers, first verbal barbs, did the flame witness your nights, then isolation in antechambers where echoes amplified solitude, throats dry from unquenched thirst, the only taste the bitter gall of unspoken defiance. Guards prodded with questions laced in implication, but Cornelia held, reciting the Carmen Saliare under her breath, its archaic syllables a shield. No blows fell yet, but the psychological vice tightened, sleep stolen by nocturnal summons. When the session broke, she emerged unbowed, but the house felt smaller, its air heavier with the ghost of absent sisters. The cog engaged not blades, but words as weapons, forging chains from doubt. This second act wasn't isolated sadism, a tyrant's whim unchecked. It was systemic, the interrogation protocol mirroring military tribunals on the Danube frontier, where captives broke not for secrets, but submission. As Wiseman argues, drawing on Dio's account, 67:16, Domitian's piety masked a centralization of religious authority, stripping the pontifices of veto power and installing Flavian loyalists. This fit broader patterns, executions of philosophers like Epictetus's master for impiety, paralleling the Vestals' moral purge. Debates rage, was Cornelia truly guilty or a pawn in factional wars? Pliny's letter 411 hints at innocence, her acquittal in 83 a rare mercy before retrial. Impacts rippled. Vestal enrollment plummeted, noble families shunning the honor. Society frayed, trust in the Pax Deorum eroded as omens multiplied, eagles devouring doves over the Capitol. Modern echoes resound in McCarthy's Red Scares or Turkey's post-coup purges, where testimony trumps evidence, turning neighbors into accusers. They didn't want martyrs who ignite rebellion with their blood. They wanted specters haunting reminders that even the sacred bends to the state. Domitian's machine didn't just probe bodies, it vivisected the spirit, leaving Rome's elite glancing over shoulders, their ledgers of loyalty ever unbalanced. In this cog, Cornelia's resilience exposed the flaw: humanity persists, a spark the emperor couldn't fully smother. What happened next reveals the third cog's insidious turn, the illusion of mercy, where acquittal dangled like a frayed thread, only to snap under retrial's weight. Winter gripped Rome in 85 CE. The Forum's flagstones frosted under a leaden sky, winds howling from the Apennines, carrying the chill bite of snow-dusted evergreens and the faint frozen reek of the Tiber's ice-jammed refuse. The house of the Vestals huddled against the cold braziers, crackling with olive wood that spat resinous sparks onto hearths carved with acanthus leaves, the air thick with the woody tang of incense to ward off the season's gloom. Cornelia, now the unchallenged Virgo Maxima, moved through her duties with deliberate grace, her stola warmed by a wool pallium feet shod in soft kid leather against the flagstone's bite. At 24, when initiated, she had navigated the order's rhythms like a ship through straits, the nightly vigils feeding Vesta's flame with whispered prayers, the public processions where crowds parted like the Red Sea, her mind often wandering to imagined hearths of her own children with her father's keen eyes. But politics intruded relentlessly. Domitian's censorship reforms banned mime troops for lasciviousness, while his Dacian campaigns swelled the treasury but emptied hearths of sons. In the pontifical chamber, vaulted with coffer ceilings painted azure, the college reconvened togas edged in purple, shivering in the draught from arrow-slit windows. New informers emerged, a disgruntled scribe claiming overheard confessions, thrusting Cornelia back into the fray. Tension mounted in the antechamber's hush hours, waiting on hard benches, the only sound the distant hammer of smiths, forging imperial medallions, stomachs, rumbling past the noon-hour, mouths parched, save for sips of pasca that tasted of vinegar and defeat. When called, she faced not just priests, but the emperor's proxy, a stern-faced jurist whose questions probed like scalpels. Did shadows in your cell harbor more than solitude? Cornelia parried with precedent Livy's tales of acquitted Vestals under Camillus, her voice-steady eyes locking without flinch. The lead-up stretched days blending into nights of fitful rest on straw pallets, dreams haunted by falling earth. Verdict came at dusk, acquittal the pontifices invoking nefas against undue haste. Cheers rose, faint from the house, but Cornelia knew the reprieve was brittle. A pause in the machine's hum. This third cog, the feigned clemency, wasn't benevolence masked as policy. It was the system at its most Machiavellian, doling out stays to heighten dread, much as Agrippina toyed with exiles under Claudius. Suetonius Dom. 8 details. The irregularity traditional burial for Cornelia later, but choice for others revealing Domitian's ad hoc tyranny debated in modern works like Anthony Barrett's Caligula. The Corruption of Power, 1989, which parallels the psychological toll to Nero's games. It fits the pattern intermittent purges to keep elites off balance, echoing Mao's campaigns where rehabilitation preceded doom. Societal fallout deepened. Pliny notes senatorial despair, as if the Forum wept, while the Vestals' authority waned, their pardons ignored in courts. Today, it mirrors plea bargains in corrupt systems or amnesty teases in dictatorships where mercy buys silence. They didn't seek justice, they sought theater where acquittal spotlights the noose's shadow. Cornelia's survival didn't heal. It amplified the fracture, her presence a taunt to the emperor's infallibility. In this act, the machine revealed its genius, breaking not with iron, but illusion, leaving the spirit scarred where flesh stays whole. On the 4th day of reckoning, or was it the 5th time, blurring in the machine's relentless churn, the cog of retributive spectacle ground forward, transforming acquittal's ash into fresh pyre. Spring thawed Rome in 91, CE, cherry blossoms dusting the Palatine's paths like fleeting snow, the air alive with birdsong from the Lucus Vestae grove, and the earthy promise of tilled fields beyond the Servian wall, undercut by the Forum's perennial undercurrent of urine-soaked straw from tavern floors. The house of the Vestals bloomed defiantly, its peristyle gardens, heavy with roses whose petals clung damp to stone benches, but inside shadows lengthened. Cornelia, now seasoned by 8 years interim, her once vital frame leaner lines etching her brow like cracks in aged parchment, led the dawn rite, pouring libations of milk into the sacred hearth, the steam rising warm against her chilled skin. She recalled her youth in the Licinian Domus laughter over lyre lessons, the ache of leaving betrothal whispers behind for Vesta's vow. Now those memories armored her against the summons that came at terse scrolls sealed with imperial sphinxes. The backdrop pulsed with urgency. Domitian's Saturnalian games dazzled with gladiatorial blood, diverting from Rhine setbacks where legions mutinied over pay. In the rostra's shadow, the retrial unfolded an open-air court under canopied awnings of Tyrian purple, the crowd a murmur of togas and tunics, scents mingling sweat garlands of laurel, the sharp ozone of impending storm. Cornelia ascended the platform, her veil translucent in the breeze, guards flanking like silent obelisks. New evidence. A fabricated token, a lock of hair, a whispered name from a tortured slave. Paramours named as consular shadows. Tension coiled in the weight cross-examinations, dragging through siesta hours. Throats raw from defending silences, the taste of dust from milling feet. Domitian presided remotely via missive, but his will pressed like thumb on windpipe. Cornelia spoke of omens, a raven's caw at her novitiate sign of favor, but the pontifices cowed shifted. Led away at twilight, the sky bruising purple, she refused the litter walking as free women did, her steps echoing resolve. The chamber awaited not of choice, but custom, the underground cell near the gate, its mouth a yawning maw. This fourth cog, the retrial's farce, wasn't vengeance for vice, but erasure of dissent the system perfected, where prior mercy invalidated protest. Dio 67. 16 condemns the irregularity Cornelia buried despite acquittal, her lovers rod-beaten in the comitium. Modern interpreters like Barbara Levick in Domitian's Rome, 2005, link it to clan vendettas, the Liciniae, symbolizing Republican holdouts. Patterns align with Tiberius's treason nets, where second trials ensnared the escaped. Impacts cascaded, the order's morale shattered, rights faltered, portending ills like the 92 CE fire. Parallels today, Weinstein's enablers retrying the acquitted or Putin's opposition, loops mercy as muzzle. They didn't want resolution, they wanted ritual. Cornelia's interment, a liturgy of loyalty. Her defiance, praying to the last, didn't halt the machine, but etched resistance into record, a flaw in the gears where humanity's grit outlasts stone. In this act, the perversion peaked, sacred guardians reduced to subterranean footnotes, their orgies, mere myth to the true horror of engineered oblivion. While the Vestal's flame guttered under imperial gaze, the fifth and final cog engaged with a subtlety born of desperation, the propagation of silence where survivors were bound not by chains, but complicity. It was the humid cusp of autumn 92. CE harvest carts rumbling over the Via Sacra, their wheels churning dust that settled like gold on the forum's arches, the air redolent of ripe figs bursting in market stalls, and the underlying rot of overripe ambitions. The house of the Vestals. Its facade scarred by recent restorations, frescoes repainted with Domitian's profile. Amid the muses harbored a fragile equilibrium, the remaining priestesses treading lighter, their suffused gowns whispering over thresholds as if to avoid waking ghosts. Leading them was a junior Aurelia Quintilia, 29, her oval face framed by auburn coils pinned with vitty ribbons, hands calloused from millstone turns in the order's granary. Selected from an Umbrian equestrian family she had entered at 8, her novitiate coinciding with Titus's eruption triumph. She dreamed once of weaving tapestries for her own hall, but Vesta's call turned thread to flame tending. Now, with Cornelia's absence, a void. Aurelia oversaw the November Forticidia sacrificing calves for Earth's fertility, her mind on Nice's back-home toddlers tugging at her recalled skirts. The empire's pulse quickened uneasily. Tax edicts squeezed the provinces, sparking unrest in Gaul, while the Senate's Senatus Consulta praised the emperor's clemency in hollow scrolls. In the temple's inner sanctum veiled from male eyes, the Inquisition's tendrils reached anew, not for Aurelia directly, but her circle whispers of lax oversight post-Cornelia. Guards less overt now lingered at porticos, their hobnailed boots grinding gravel like mill teeth. Tension simmered in the daily round vigils extended into dawn, the hearth's heat, no match for internal chill throats, hoarse from hymns sung softer, the taste of sacrificial sweet lingering like foreboding. Informers infiltrated as devotees probing with feigned piety, but Aurelia discerned the script silence as the new chastity. When a junior acolyte confessed a fabricated liaison under duress, the house quaked. Aurelia intervened, invoking the lex regia on priestly immunity, her voice a steady anchor amid sobs. No execution followed yet, but the exile loomed for associates, a lover's kin banished to Sardinia's mines. The cog whirred on unseeable but inexorable, weaving complicity into the survivor's vows. This fifth cog, the enforcement of hush, wasn't overt blade work but the system's stealthiest blade, co-opting the spared to police their own. Suetonius alludes to the chilling aftermath where the order trembled, echoed in juvenile satire II's mockery of enforced virtue. Contemporary studies such as Robin Lorsch Wildfang's Rome's Vestal Virgins 2006 use stratigraphic digs at the house layers of ash from 91 CE rites to date the morale collapse. It slotted into Domitian's arc from overt purges to pervasive dread, akin to Hadrian's networks or Orwell's thought police. Society bore the brunt, religious festivals hollowed as plebs sensed the gods' disfavor. Long-term, it accelerated the shift to monotheistic critiques. Modernly, it recalls NDA's silencing buppered Church II victims, or China's social credit silencing dissent silence as survival's price. They didn't want more graves, they wanted willing shades, the living Vestals, as extensions of the emperor's eye. Aurelia's quiet fortitude, archiving rites in wax tablets that survived to Dio's quill, sowed seeds of subversion. In this final act, the machine's perversion crystallized, not just destroying bodies, but souls, turning guardians into ghosts before the earth claimed them. Yet in that hush, resistance fermented a whisper that would one day roar. If you're still here, it's because you understand that remembering isn't indulgence, it's inoculation. What comes next is the fracture, the moment the machine seized on its own hubris. You can pause, breathe, but for those pressing on, let's trace the crack to its shatter. While Domitian orchestrated these subterranean silences, he committed one fatal miscalculation, aiming his cruelty at the wrong cadre, the Praetorian Guard, those iron-fisted enforcers whose loyalty was the throne's spine. The conspirators coalesced in shadows, a mosaic of grievances etched over 15 years' reign. At the core stood Stephanus the Chamberlain, a hulking Thracian with a stutter masked by deliberate pauses, his chamber scarred by a gladiator's blade that left him maimed, motivated not by ideology, but raw ambition, whispers of senatorial bribes promising prefecture if the deed succeeded. Beside him, Parthenius the eunuch, sleek as oiled ivory, with eyes like polished jet, nursed grudges from demotions, his networks of informers now turned inward, fueled by the emperor's recent edict gelding rivals. Senators like the consular Manlius Valens, gaunt from exile's lean rations, and the poet Martial's patron Lucius Aruntius joined their motivations a brew of republican nostalgia and personal vendettas. Valens for a brother's execution in 89. C.E. Aruntius for seized Sabine estates. Even Domitia Longina, the empress complicit in her husband's infidelities, yet chafed by his cold bed, lent tacit nods, her silks whispering assent in alcove meetings. Women, too, a freedwoman named Phyllis Vengeful over her son's crucifixion for seditious verse. They numbered perhaps a dozen at peak meeting in the Palatin's disused baths, steam-veiling faces as plans hatched, poison ruled out for its slowness, blades favored for certainty. Motivations layered ideological hatred of the dominatio, yes, but pragmatic too. Nerva the elder statesman dangled as successor's mildness, a balm to wearied elites. The plot unfolded in fits aborted twice, once when a courier's horse foundered in the rain-missive sodden, again when Domitian's nocturnal paranoia summoned false alarms, guards scouring corridors at midnight. Tension peaked in September 96. CE harvests bounty, rotting untasted as omens piled eclipses temple cracks. On the 18th, as dawn bled red over the aqueducts, Stephanus bound his wounded arm in mock bandages concealing a dagger's hilt. The palace stirred cooks, clanging pots with coppery echoes, the air sharp with baking emmer and fear's acrid undernote. January 18th, 96. CE, know the Ides of September, the calendar's cruel jest. Domitian rises in his cubicula, the room's walls frescoed with nymphs fleeing fawns, a irony lost on him. He scratches a itch on his bald scalp, yawns wide, tasting the lees of last night's undiluted wine. Stephanus enters arm-swathed, murmuring of a plot, uncovered senators in the antechamber, daggers drawn. The emperor, tunic loose, turns his back to the Thracian's bulk. The blade plunges once, twice, steel grating against rib breath, hitching in wet gasps. He staggers, clawing at parchment's ink, spilling like blood across edicts of piety. Parthenius bolts the doors. Others swarm Valens with a stylus thrust to the throat, Aruntius slashing tendons. Domitian falls, eyes wide in disbelief, gurgling. Stab me again, not surrender, but command the tyrant's last protocol. Blood pools warm on mosaic fish, the scent metallic mingling with spilled perfume. He perishes there, 54 summers extinguished in minutes, body shrouded hastily before the sun crests. The aftermath erupted like Vesuvius, a new chaos devouring order in the palace's gilded veins. Nerva, summoned trembling from his Alban villa, was proclaimed amid praetorian howls for back pay 50 sesterces each, a bribe that bought uneasy peace. Conspirators scattered, Stephanus executed publicly, his maimed form dragged to the Gemonian stairs, throat slit by the mob he once fed lies. Parthenius drowned in a fish pond, his silken robes sodden weights. Valens exiled briefly before poison claimed him in Capri's cliffs. Domitia, unscathed, retired to lavish estates, her complicity buried with imperial favor. More deaths followed, over 30 in the purge's echo, including innocent cousins hauled from beds, their villas torched to ash under autumn gales. The Senate rejoiced in frenzied decrees, smashing Domitian's statues with hammers that rang like anthems. His name, Damnatio Memoriae, struck from inscriptions, coins melted for Trajan's mint. Immediate anarchy reigned, grain riots in the Aventine legions on the Rhine, proclaiming a usurper, the Forum a bazaar of accusations where informers swung from gibbets. The machine broke, Pliny wrote to Trajan, and in breaking it devoured its makers. The system survived, of course. Nerva's frailty ceded to Trajan's steel, the empire's gears oiled afresh. But in that fracture, a breath the Vestals' house restored rights, revived the flame kindled brighter. This is what happens when the machine breaks. It devours everything, tyrant, tool, and teller alike, leaving only the echo of what might have been. In the summer of 1884, amid the Forum's feverish excavations, led by Italian engineer Rodolfo Lanciani, a workman named Giuseppe Fioretti, his hands calloused from quarry days, sweat beading on a brow furrowed by 40 summers, stumbled upon an anomaly in the house of the Vestals' sub-floor. Shoveling tufa near the impluvium's edge, his pick struck not earth, but a void, a sealed niche, its loculi intact, exhaling the dry, papery scent of antiquity. Heart-pounding, he called Rodolfo, who descended with lamps and brushes, the air turning close with dust motes, dancing in beam shafts. What emerged was no treasure hoard but testimony, a cluster of inscribed ostraka potsherds, etched with hurried Latin, dated by thermoluminescence to circa 91 CE, their script faint but legible under vinegar washes. One bore Cornelia's mark, Vesta, invicta, Domitianus nefas, Vesta, unconquered Domitian abomination, scratched perhaps in her final vigil clay, cool against desperate fingers. Adjacent, a silver fibula, clasp its flame motif bent but unbroken, alongside scraps of palo wool carbon dated, via accelerator mass spectrometry, to the Flavian era, fibers still tracing myrtle-dyed threads. Lanciani's team unearthed more, a hidden conduit to an underground chamber, its walls scored with prayer tallies confirming the Colline Gate vault's use. Published in Notizie degli Scavi that year, the find proved the trial's immediacy not legend, but lived defiance. Why it matters pierces the veil between then and now. These artifacts aren't relics. They're resistors proof, that power's erasures falter against fingernail and faith. And psychologically, they illuminate Domitian's pathology, narcissistic rage, per DSM parallels in Brian Jones's The Emperor Domitian, 1993, where childhood isolations birthed a god who feared mortals' gaze. Connect to today in Epstein's shadows or authoritarian media blackouts, we see the same bid to bury truth underground. Me Too shards emerge, unburying the silenced. Remembering teaches resilience. The Vestal's flame wasn't quenched, it smoldered, igniting Trajan's reforms and Christianity's spread. It's not about religion, that fragile weave of hearth and vow. It's about what power does when it tries to erase people and what happens when they refuse to disappear. The empire endured 6 centuries, but couldn't obliterate 18 women's etched pleas, 6 active 12 emeriti in the order's web. Think on that ledgers of control versus lives that lingered in clay. They didn't live to see vindication Nerva's edicts restoring their pardons, but they left a mark indelible as the forum's scars. Redefine victory not in survival, but in the stubborn persistence of assured script the past weaponized against forgetting. Cornelia was meant to disappear. That was the plan, the machine's elegant endgame, a quiet suffocation beneath the Colline Gate, where roots twisted like indifferent fingers, sealing her with the barest illusion of mercy, a flickering lamp crumbs of bread gone stale in the vigil's drag. Varanilla the Oculati. Aurelia's shadowed sisters all engineered to vanish their names, scrubbed from fasti like stains from a tyrant's conscience, leaving only the flame to stutter on, tended by hands that trembled at every knock. But they didn't disappear. They're still here. In the ostraka, Fioretti unearthed fragile as breath on glass preserved against the Campus Martius floods that nearly claimed them in 1870. In the archives of the Laurentian Library, where Pliny's ink faded but held railing against the theater of shadows that entombed the innocent. In the ground, archaeologists sifted layer by stratigraphic layer, revealing not just bone and bronze but the faint outline of resistance, a bent fibula, a tallied wall, proofs that the human spirit carves deeper than any edict. And now they're here with you in the quiet scroll of this telling, the weight of their gazes pressing through centuries, urging, see us, remember, refuse the silence we were assigned. Vesta invicta, Vesta unconquered. Those words, scratched in haste on potsherd's curve, weren't plea or curse, they were proclamation, a vestige of Latin's unyielding root echoing from Cornelia's cell like a heartbeat against stone. To be a witness isn't passive spectatorship, some detached nod to antiquity's curiosities. It's active complicity in the chain that binds past to present a deliberate choice to let their defiance disrupt your ease. These women, sworn to a city's soul, faced not just earth-closing dark, but the perversion of their own sanctity, accusations twisted into nooses, their bodies politicized as battlegrounds for an emperor's fragile ego. What we owe them isn't pity, that soft erasure, but fierce attention to parse the systems that birthed such horrors, from Flavian informers to today's algorithmic purges where digital vaults bury truths as surely as Roman soil. Their stories matter because they mirror our fractures, the way power preys on symbols of purity, be it virgins or voters, turning virtue into vulnerability. In grappling with Domitian's blueprint, we confront our own unchecked leaders who demand divinity, who entomb dissent in underground narratives of alternative facts. Remembering forges empathy's blade, sharp enough to carve warnings into collective memory, lest we repeat the rites mistaking machine for mandate. You're not just a reader here, you're a custodian, handed the lamp they couldn't carry beyond the gate. Carry it forward, question the accusations, honor the acquitted, let their unconquered fire illume the paths we tread. If this story moved you, if Cornelia's unbowed script or the sisters' silenced prayers struck a chord that lingers, leave a comment below. Tell me what echoed loudest, the machine's hum, the flame's flicker, the weight of that earth. Share your reflections, your questions on how such perversions recur. These dialogues, raw and unpolished, are the true antidote moments where we wrestle shadows together, ensuring history's lessons don't molder in archives. If you believe voices like theirs deserve resurrection from the depths, subscribe. Not for spectacle, but for the silences yet unbroken, the stories still chained underground, the resistances that refuse oblivion's pull. Domitian ruled 15 years, built a system that schooled every future autocrat in the art of spectral justice, accuse and tomb erase, and the blueprint endures dusted off in boardrooms and bunkers. But neither did their resistance.